Well, after sweating through about 2 shirts out in the field, we decided to change clothes and head inside. Where we're at now is our radio studio. Darren and I have been doing a radio show lately called Ag PhD Radio on Sirius XM. So here we are in the studio. Nothing terribly fancy, but I like the sound and I like the temperature.
Well, the temperature is quite different. As you notice, I had to put a coat on when he came into the meat locker here of our radio studio. As Brian was mentioning, our radio show is actually on the new rural radio channel on Sirius XM. That's channel 80, where there's farm and rural lifestyle programming all day. It's something new, and listeners are really excited when they find that station.
That's the first ag station on Sirius XM.
So we're on there every afternoon. We do an hour-long live call-in show. So like Ag PhD TV, you can certainly email us questions and give us a call or something like that. But during our radio show, you actually get to interact with us live, and that's pretty fun for us.
Yeah, so that's 2 p.m. Central, weekdays. Darren and I are doing this live every single day, so we invite you to give us a call or send us an email. Well, one of the questions we've been getting a lot lately from farmers is, what lessons did you learn in 2013 about corn that can help us going forward to 2014? So where I've been starting with everybody is on the fertility side. We saw more yellow corn. I mean, I was literally sick to my stomach when I was driving around in early June this year, because all the cornfields I thought just looked absolutely horrible. Even where we'd put on a lot of fertility, a lot of guys were trying to do what they could with fertility, but we really saw that placement was important, making sure you had ample fertility, and then also in terms of stabilizing nitrogen or keeping phosphorus available with things like Avail, all those things really showed up this year.
Well, we saw them early in the season. We saw deficiency symptoms showing up in fields. We also are seeing them later on. Like, for example, with the nitrogen, a lot of that nitrogen was lost. And, depending on when it was put on, how it was put on, and so forth, as Brian mentioned, if we've already lost some of that nitrogen and now we get decent growing conditions and we get a crop that could have really produced, that's where you're going to see it showing up on the lower leaves of the plant. You're going to get nitrogen firing from the tips of the leaves moving down the midrib. Now, once you see that firing on leaves and all these symptoms this late in the season, there is just nothing you can do to save the yield that you've already lost. However, this goes into your planning for next year, which, for us on our farm, that starts right away. We're buying fertilizer normally this time of year. And so we've already got to start thinking, all right, we need to put a little more on, or we need to do it just a little bit differently.
One of the issues and one of the reasons why we saw more fertility issues this year, in my opinion, certainly the weather had an awful lot to do with it. But the other thing is, all these seed companies are telling you and telling me as farmers, we need to raise higher plant populations. So guys are bumping it. Even on our farm, our average plant population this year was probably 34 or 35,000 as opposed to 30,000 just last year. So if you're going to bump that much, you're going to bump up 15-20% more plants, and you say, well, my yield goal really isn't a lot higher. Yeah, that may be, but now if you've got 15 to 20% more plants out there, now you have to spread those nutrients over a lot more plants, and that's just not going to work in some cases. So take, for example, lodging issues. We saw a lot of lodging problems this year, and I think a lot of that has to do with the higher populations, because when we have higher populations, the plants are going to grow taller because of competition. And then the other thing is, if you didn't fertilize properly, if you don't have enough potassium there to make those stalks thick, they're going to fall down. So I think this was going to happen. It was bound to happen. It's one of the reasons why for the last probably 6, 7, 8 years, we've been bumping up potassium and phosphorus as much as we have on our farm, preparing for when we wanted to go with higher populations now. So once we get later on in the season and see how yields turn out, then we can talk more about how did fungicides work, how did some of the soil insecticides work, and things like that. But for now, at least, we know that fertility had a huge impact on this year's crop. Obviously, drainage was one of the things. So even though a lot of guys were coming out of a drought year, we ended up with floods. It doesn't happen very often, but it did this year. So drainage really paid. And then, of course, planning ahead and getting products early. That was very important in 2013.
Well, one of the things you always need to plan ahead for is our Weed of the Week. We'll show you what it is coming up next.